Welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. Your chance to learn about the teachings of the Catholic Church on sacred music, both in theory and practice. Through interviews, discussions, and music, your hearts and minds will be lifted up and better understand what it means to sing the praise of His glory. And now, your host, Dr. Jennifer Donelson-Nowicka.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. We're kicking off Season 5 with an interview with Father Christopher Smith on Catholic identity and education, the role of sacred music in a parish school, and improving school masses. But first, I wanted to fill you in on some big changes for me that have happened since the end of Season 4. It was a great summer with wonderful students at Dunwoody in New York, as well as the CMAA Colloquium in Maryland and Sacra Liturgia at St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park, California. And as that summer came to a close, I took up a new position at St. Patrick's Seminary, and we've just gotten settled in after moving from New York to here in Silicon Valley, just south of San Francisco. I've accepted a newly endowed chair in sacred music here at St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park, endowed to honor a frequent guest of our podcast, the longtime Stanford professor, editor of sacred music, president of the CMAA, and director of the St. Anne Choir, Dr. William Mart. This chair is an initiative of Archbishop Cordileone and St. Patrick's Seminary to provide education for the men studying for the priesthood at the seminary, as well as to build a graduate program in sacred music for lay musicians, focusing on coursework during the summer months. And on that final count, I will have some extremely exciting news about upcoming events in the spring and summer in future episodes, so please stay tuned. But for the matter at hand, Father Christopher Smith is the pastor of Prince of Peace Catholic Church in Taylors, South Carolina. He's a convert to Catholicism and wrote on the French Jesuit Henri de Lubac for his doctorate in sacred theology. He's a polyglot and has recently expanded beyond the Romance languages to Turkish, Syriac, and Arabic. But more than that, he's a good musician and has a heart for Catholic education and inviting people into the fullness of Catholic culture through parish and school life. Here's our interview. Father Smith, thank you so much for being here with me today.
I'm really grateful for the invitation, Jen. It's good to hear your voice again.
Yeah, indeed. I really admire all the work that you've done for these years in your priestly assignments. And I'm wondering if you could share with our listeners a little bit about your parish and your school, and maybe about how the two interact.
Okay, well, my present parish is Prince of Peace Catholic Church in Taylors, South Carolina. So it's a suburb of Greenville, South Carolina, which is really the buckle of the Bible Belt. And we were founded in 1974, right in all of the aftermath of Vatican II. And it really was kind of the spirit of Vatican II experimentation parish. Which is really amazing to kind of look back and to see kind of, how it's developed over the years.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, my predecessor was here for 13 years, and he very kind of gently guided the parish toward a greater appreciation of traditional Catholicism. The extraordinary form of the Latin Mass was started almost 20 years ago. So we've had Sunday Mass for about 20 years in the parish and daily Mass for almost 12 now.
Wow. So can you tell me a little bit about the parish school as well?
Well, so the school was founded about 20 years ago, right, when the Extraordinary Form Latin Mass community also came to the parish. And I remember when they started the school, I was at a parish across town, and I thought, why on earth are they starting a school over there? But it actually, over time, has become very noted for many things. One, the kind of academic level is extremely high, not only among kind of just schools in South Carolina, but of private schools and diocesan schools in particular. But there's always been, so even before I came, a great emphasis on the arts and on music in particular. We had a tremendous chant teacher who now helps out with the choir school at St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, Lorraine Enlow. And so she started teaching the ward method in the school and got the kids and their families really super excited about Gregorian chant. And she went on to other things before I came here. But it meant that there was already kind of in the school this commitment to sacred liturgy and to Gregorian chant, and also in the parish. So we were able to kind of build over time on that model.
Well, that's really amazing. So We're going to talk about the development and betterment of Catholic school liturgies, but you already had a really great foundation to build on thanks to your predecessor. Do you know much about, how he went about building such a strong foundation when he first came to the parish?
Well, I know that in his time here, he did a lot of work because with a new church being built, and it's kind of an interesting building. It's a very modern building in many respects, but not your normal kind of brutalist architecture that we have now, and not really the renewal of the classical architecture either. So it's kind of its own kind of sui generis thing. But he used that as an opportunity to start kind of moving the needle forward by integrating Gregorian chant into the ordinary form of the Mass. He hired a really wonderful maestro named Alan Reed, who was here for many years in the parish. And so they started trying to bring the parish and school music programs together so that many of the children who were in the school, as well as homeschool and religious education, would start feeding into the parish children's music programs. And that just kind of began to build on itself over the years.
That's so great. So are you at the school on a regular basis?
I am. So the way that, obviously it's a parish school, so the pastor is technically the head of the school, and then the principal is kind of the manager for day-to-day operations. And so I'm in the school not as much as I would like to be. In my previous places, I was in the school more. But so every Friday, for example, I spend the morning in the school visiting classrooms. And obviously, whenever we have various things going on, I'm there. On Wednesday is the all-school Mass, and then we hear confessions of one grade at a time every Wednesday after the school Mass. And then I'm always kind of, popping into the classroom and seeing the children when they're on campus. And so that's really a tremendous gift to be involved in the school.
Yeah, and such a gift for the children, too. So you mentioned that you're in the buckle of the Bible Belt. I'm wondering, how does that affect the character of your parish, being surrounded basically by Protestants?
Well, Catholicism in South Carolina is kind of an interesting phenomenon. When I grew up in South Carolina here in Greenville, I didn't even know a Catholic before I actually became a Catholic. At the same time, though, it's increasing very rapidly. We have lots of people moving in, especially to the Greenville area because of industries, lots of European companies like BMW and Michelin. So it's an interesting mix because we have lots of European Catholics moving in. We have people from the kind of traditionally Catholic enclaves of the Midwest and the North coming in, and then the kind of Greenville native Catholic crowd. But we also have a number of converts. So, for example, Bob Jones University, which is the world's largest fundamentalist Christian university, is in my parish boundaries.
Wow.
And yeah, so it makes for a very interesting thing. So we invariably have, one or two students every year who, start, asking questions and then join the Introduction to Catholicism class, and then they become Catholic. And we have a number of converts from Anglicanism as well. So our churches are kind of interesting mixes here, especially in the Greenville area.
Wow, that's so interesting. It's such a unique character, and I'm sure it's got many different characteristics from Flannery O'Connor's world, but there's something kind of mystical about Southern Catholicism.
Well, yeah, it really is kind of interesting because the Southern Catholics, like the native Catholics, share a lot of characteristics with English Catholicism, right? It's very reserved, it's very ecumenical, it's not very kind of exuberant and Baroque in its expression of Catholicism. But now all of a sudden we have this huge influx of Hispanics and influx of people from the North. And so they come down here and they find our parishes very different. There's a lot of emphasis on apologetics, for example, because we're so few, our faithful really need to know why they're Catholic and need to have an experience of the parish as a real live community. And so we try to kind of connect people into the parishes so that it's not just a cafeteria you come in and come out, but a real live community of faith, because we've had to do that in order to survive as Catholics in this area.
Right. Yeah. So let's get into the weeds a little bit here about our topic of the day, which is improving school liturgies and the inculcation of Catholic identity and the impression of the Catholic faith on children, especially through the Catholic schools. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what sorts of initiatives you implemented when you first came to the school. You talked a little bit about the foundation, but what did you want to contribute particularly?
From the very beginning, there is something which I always tell my people that I'm like a broken record and say the same thing over and over again. And I always say the school is the primary apostolate of the parish for the handing on of the Catholic faith. Because some people will approach Catholic schools as just a cheap version of private education. And I understand why that tendency is there, but I tell people that's not what our mission is. If you want that, that's lovely. There are lots of other opportunities. This is not your place, right? There's obviously a clarity of mission from the very beginning, which is part of what we do. And I always tell people the most important thing we do in a Catholic school actually does not happen during the school day at all, but happens on Sunday at Mass. And that means that everything we do in the school flows from what we're doing at the sacred liturgy. And so the first thing that I did when we got here was kind of rethink the school week. So, for example, Wednesday, hump day, as everyone knows it, is the middle of the week. And so we have a solemn Mass right in the middle of the week. And so we do it, and this is probably not, the best kind of liturgically in certain ways, but we do it basically as a high Mass in the middle of the week. And the children take all of the roles except for that of the priest, right? And we do it so that in many ways it's a dress rehearsal for Sunday. We do a mix of things. So when we can, we do English or simple English propers. Then we will do the English hymns that we're going to sing the next Sunday, unless it's kind of just totally liturgically inappropriate for the day. And then we do the Latin ordinary that we will use at the extraordinary form for the upcoming Sunday. And having it so that, we have, incense and torches and an MC who's an 8th grader, subdeacon crucifers, all of this kind of stuff. And the idea is that over time, the children will be exposed to the riches of the treasury of sacred music. But then that dovetails with their music classes as well. So in our music classes, we teach, the kind of basics of music theory. We do instrumental things with the children, but we also spend a lot of time on producing choral music. So I wrote a pastoral letter on the liturgical formation of children, which is available on the website, which is princeofpeacetailors.net. And in that, I kind of outlined the vision that we have for the liturgical formation of children in the parish, whether they be in the school or not. And every time a new family comes into the school as part of their admissions process, I sit down with them and, get to know the families a little bit, why they're choosing Prince of Peace as a Catholic school, but also try to explain, why we do what we do. And we also invite the parents to be a part of the school Mass. So, for example, on Wednesday, often we will have parents who will come to the school Mass and sit with the children. We have parishioners who come to the Mass as well, so that they actually begin this whole absorbing and learning process as we go through the liturgical year. And we also make a big deal about processions and feast days and things like that. The school choirs will sing motets at the offertory and communion for those days. And then they take their kind of school choir time and then go into the parish choirs. So on Sundays, we have it so that the 10 a.m., which is the English solemn Mass, the principal Mass of the parish, the first Sunday of the month is sung by the children. So they do all of it. So they do the motets, they do the hymns, they do the propers, they do the whole thing. So what they're learning on Wednesday at the school Mass then dovetails into the Sunday Mass once a month.
That's so amazing. It's just inspiring to listen to you talk about this. And I know that our listeners are going to hear what you're talking about and just be like, yes, that's what I want. And I'm wondering, we're going to get into the weeds more about things about processions and liturgical year in a moment, but where did you come up with these inspirations? I know that you have a particular fondness, for example, for Monsignor Hellriegel's writings, but where is this just a product of your imagination about how to make these things happen?
Yeah. Well, I especially when I was in college at Christendom was when I was exposed to the ideals of the liturgical movement. And Monsignor Hellriegel, I constantly come back to his pastoral practice because he took a parish and a school, which was pretty standard in St. Louis in I guess, the 30s or 40s when he got started with this. And, the first thing he did was on the Feast of the Assumption to teach the school children how to sing the Missa cum jubilo and to make a big deal about the blessing of herbs from the Roman ritual. Right. And so he saw the school as kind of foncet culmen to a certain degree of renewing the parish according to the lines of the classical liturgical movement. And so we started kind of, here at Principes doing a lot of those things and enriching the experience of worship, not by trying to do gimmicky things, but just by taking out of the storehouse things new and old. So, like, for example, we'll do blessings from the Roman ritual. We'll do blessings from the Book of Blessings, right? We'll do processions like that of Candlemas with lots of all the ritual ceremonies associated with it. And then we'll just do kind of impromptu devotional processions, to go bless the classrooms. And that's the kind of thing that the children really latch on to. And because we involve them in very real ways with all of that, it's really amazing. So, for example, this year for the Feast of All Saints, I'm taking another thing out of Monsignor Hellriegel's playbook, where we have children who will carry a relic of a saint, and then their parents will accompany them with candles, and we're going to process around the church singing the Litany of the Saints, and then they can dress up like the saints and all that kind of fun stuff. And then we regroup and then have solemn English Mass on All Saints Day. So there are ways to kind of capture the imagination of the children and give them kind of a liturgical approach to their spirituality.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to pick your brain about more ideas. You've mentioned Candlemas and you mentioned All Saints. What are some of the other really great things that you really enjoy about different feasts or other parts of the liturgical year that you do with the kids?
Oh gosh, there's so much, I'd say. So celebrating the memorials of the saints is always super important because, you're able to draw those connections with the lives of the saints and everything else that's going on in the liturgy. But even sometimes I will do things, for example, like before Mass, to put on the vestments, like in front of the children. And I have a text that a commentator uses to explain what each of the vestments is. And then what the prayers are traditionally said with each vestment. But then, like, I'll go on the playground and I'll ask kind of questions like, okay, well, what is the little linen that the priest uses to wipe his hands? And they'll say, oh, it's a maniturgium. Well, what does maniturgium mean? Oh, it's Latin for hand dryer thingy, right? So one of the things that we want to do is for the school Mass to give the tools to the children to be comfortable at a Mass in English and comfortable at a Mass in Latin. And so because of that, we do this kind of gradation through the year where at the beginning we do everything in English, and then little by little we start incorporating more of the Latin so that by the end of the year, everything at the altar is in Latin. So, and then they also know the Domine non sum dignus and the Suscipiat and all of these things. And so they learn it as the year goes on, and then we go back to zero at the beginning of the year and then just keep building throughout the year. So there's kind of gradual crescendo so that by the time we get to, graduation, then the children are, doing almost everything of their parts in Latin.
So let me pick your brain about this a little bit, because someone thinking about parish school and catechetical programs and really handing on the faith, there's so little attention been paid to really good liturgy. And we all know how bad Catholic school liturgies can be. It seems to evidence that people don't automatically think of this as the place where you go to really hand on the faith. But what you're saying is that everything is so embedded within these liturgical acts, and you can teach prayer, you can teach virtue, you can teach doctrine, you can teach things that are honorable and good and beautiful and true, with these simple things. What are the things you do to really make that connection and draw out that deeper meaning in what you do? Do you talk about it a lot, or is it mostly still embedded in the experience?
Well, I think just going through the experience of the rhythm of the liturgical year and all these processions and blessings and masses is itself instructive. But I'm always trying to go back to those kind of nuggets of liturgical knowledge when I'm dealing with the children. So the catechetical formation of the children is extremely important. And often parishes think in terms of something which is just doctrinally orthodox. And that's important, but that's not the whole thing. So we have recently adopted the new Sophia Institute press kind of catechetical series, and we use it in both the parish and in the school, and even some of our homeschool families use it. So, but the great thing, and one of the reasons that I chose it is that it has all of the kind of orthodox doctrine that you would want in a good Catholic school curriculum, but it also kind of educates the child in terms of art and music and literature and the lives of the saints and Catholic history. And so it's a little bit richer than just kind of the Baltimore Catechism, answer a bunch of questions, and don't become a heretic model, which is also wonderful, but that's not the entirety of a Catholic formation. And the families are very involved in that. Very often, when they come home, they're working on these things where they have homework every day, 5 days a week of religion, but it's not just kind of memorizing factoids about doctrine. It's a more richer kind of expression of the faith. And we have a lot of desire to teach history as an academic discipline rather than just kind of generic social studies. And so those things, especially that have an apologetics value for our children, we focus a lot on. So obviously, growing up Catholic in the South, they really identify with the stories of the English martyrs, for example, right? So we make a big deal about those kind of things because, they were martyrs for the Mass, they were martyrs for unity with the Pope. And so that becomes kind of alive for them in a way. And we also, make sure that the church building itself kind of speaks to the children. So like we have the shrine of Blessed Karl of Austria, for example, a shrine to Saint Josemaria Escriva. So we're always like, hey, we're celebrating these days and, let's go see the relics. And what are relics? And why do we do relics? And I mean, you just keep kind of reinforcing all these things from different angles. And then see the lives of the saints as opportunities to talk about, about heroic virtue and those things as well.
That's so wonderful. Can you share with us just some more ideas? You've talked about processions and about the different devotions. I mean, is there a place for the rosary, for adoration? What do you do in terms of confession? What does that look like in your school?
Sure. Well, I'm always kind of insistent that both in the parish and the school, we prize the sacred liturgy as the font of Christian spirituality. So like you have all these devotions, which are really wonderful, but I don't try to kind of multiply the devotions ad nauseum with the children, right? And whenever we have parish celebrations of things, we always find a way to get the children involved. And then we always try to do like a family fun event that is related to it. So for example, this weekend, we have Mass at 5:00. A lot of the school children will be there. We're having a big procession over to the beer truck for the blessing of the beer before Oktoberfest, right? Singing the Litany of the Saints as we go. Yeah, so there's things like that we do. The rosary, the children do often in class. They'll do rosary processions during May crownings. I mean, all of those kind of things that are kind of, traditional staples of Catholic school life. The blessings obviously being very important. Now, in the parish, we have the Liturgy of the Hours celebrated in English in the church, all of the hours except for midday prayer every day. And so sometimes the children, in their own classes, will participate in the Liturgy of the Hours. So like the middle schoolers will, do, an hour of the divine office when they're in school and, do prayers individually as classes more than just the kind of norm.
Wow. That sounds like a packed schedule. I mean, how do you incorporate that? Is it just like a small break? Like, oh, we're going to walk over to the chapel and do it for a moment, or you do it in the classroom?
Yeah, well, it's a mix because we also have perpetual adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. And so the children as classes will come over usually once a week for a brief period. So like, the K4 kids are going to be there for like 5 minutes, right? So, but the middle schoolers then go and begin to have, kind of set apart times for private prayer and adoration in the chapel when they're there. And so they're kind of, we kind of build up as they go through the process of adoration. Now, of course, we have a perpetual adoration chapel, so that's really super easy to do. But we do, for example, on every Friday of Lent, we have Stations of the Cross and Benediction of the Most Blessed Sacrament. For a while, we were doing on First Fridays benediction before the end of the school day, but that got a little crazy with scheduling. Our teachers are really phenomenal at being extremely efficient and accounting for every second of the day. They're just really awesome. Like, I can't speak highly enough about all of them. So they get it all done, but they keep everybody on task at all times, which is just incredible.
So let me piggyback off of what you were just talking about in terms of your teachers. As you know, I'm sure the experience of a lot of Catholics is that there's not always an alignment between the teachers and the mission of the school, like you're talking about. So what advice would you give to a pastor or principal who's really trying to remake the Catholic identity of their school in terms of, working with people that are there, bringing them along, and hiring for mission?
Sure. Well, I think that we have to see schools as works in progress, right? And I always remind people, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. My biggest failures have been having this big vision and wanting to go way too quickly with it. And that has not always worked out well, to be honest with you. I think the principal is absolutely crucial to this. Because if the principal understands the vision and understands where you're going, and you are in constant communication about every aspect of what you're trying to do with the principal, that is huge. The priest being a part of faculty meetings, the priest meeting with individual faculty on a regular basis, not just for performance reviews, but like, okay, so how are we doing with the mission of the school is crucial. We also, every time we have a new hire, that's an opportunity to kind of cast wide the net. And then as people are interviewing, during that interview process, we present, okay, so how do you feel about these aspects of our school's life? Because we say kind of up front, this is not everybody's cup of tea, because it really is very high identity Catholicism, if you could call it that. It's a more traditional experience of the faith. And so some people might be a little bit kind of, perplexed or turned off by that. But then again, you also have people who that's exactly what they're looking for. But then you have to make sure that they have the professional chops as well. So, sometimes you have a person who is super Catholic and they get the vision, but they're not necessarily in the pedagogical department really who you need. Right. And that can militate against you. So you want to kind of, very gingerly move the needle forward. I'm always talking about the school as the primary apostolate of the parish for the handing on of the Catholic faith. They're constantly hearing this. And we also in our school made a very radical decision to privilege those who are not only registered parishioners, but those who are truly active in the parish. And so, like, for example, we structured at this point with this kind of, significant discount for parishioners, but you got to go to Mass 75% of the time, and you've got to be able to prove that you're there, right? Because otherwise we kind of telegraph that it's not really important if you're part of the community or if you go to Mass. And when you don't have that real sense of true commitment to the parish and going to Mass and being involved in the life of the parish, then all of a sudden you have, the tail wagging the dog. So, in some schools you have, non-parishioners or people who aren't actually practicing Catholics who are more of a percentage than the people who are actually in your pews all the time. Right. And sometimes schools do that because I think that's the only way that you're going to survive. But then it causes all kinds of issues for the mission. So you have families that aren't necessarily mission fit for a school. And it doesn't mean they're bad people or bad families, but it changes the tenor of a Catholic school when that's the dynamic. And so now our school is about 80% parishioners and 20% non-parishioners, and we have very few non-Catholics. And the parishioners recognize, oh yeah, this is definitely our school. And, we're not trying to like kind of exclude non-parishioners, but at the same time, there's something about going to mass on Sunday in a parish like this, and then having your children in the school, and school, church, and home are all on the same page.
Right.
And it's a great partnership, and it builds a culture around that.
Could I ask you a question, just kind of a nitty-gritty question? How do you ask families to prove that they've been going to mass?
Well, we use the most antiquated system you could possibly imagine of the envelopes. So even if they give electronically, they have to, put their envelope in the collection plate, and then we do a review every semester, and then we kind of go to the families and say, okay, here is what is in our records. Let's make sure that your records match our records, and how can we address this to make sure that you get the parishioner right. Now, it's a financial incentive, which is kind of not what I think is really necessarily the best thing, but it does kind of take some families who may be on the margins of Catholic practice and begins to kind of, reintegrate them into the life of the parish.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, God uses even inferior intentions to bring about good.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And, we have I think of, one family from the parish where this was an interesting situation, a couple who were divorced, but they really wanted their child to be in a Catholic school. And so the mother, who was not a Catholic, became a Catholic just because of being involved in the school. And then she ended up, getting an annulment and getting married to another person in the parish. And so because they were in the school, we had all these school kids at the wedding mass, right? So, that's kind of, and, we have this kind of interesting situations like that all the time. And the MC at the wedding was their child. So these kind of things are really great kind of opportunities where you see a school can really kind of connect people who may have been entirely outside of the orbit of Catholicism and just looking for a safe place for your children. And we can say, hey, that's great. We provide that. But there's also this whole living community and world that you can be a part of. And we really want you to be a part of that. And they do. And then when you say okay, well, your children are going to be singing on the first Sunday of the month, so you better be there. You don't want to miss your child going to mass. And then all of a sudden the children come home and they say, well, I want to go to mass every Sunday. Well, how do you say no to your child? Right. So, and then I'll guilt trip them and say, I don't want them coming to confession to confess not going to mass on Sundays.
Yeah.
So that also, is also helpful. So.
Wrapping back to music, since this is a sacred music podcast, what's your music rehearsal schedule like? Do they have classroom music every day and then an extra after-school rehearsal? What does that look like?
Well, so right now we have a couple of hours a week of music instruction as part of the school. And then after school on Wednesdays, we have all the various kind of school choirs, but then we work it so that then they go right into the appropriate age group of the parish choir as well. So they're getting kind of double rehearsals, basically. So for the school stuff and for the parish stuff. The school stuff does all kinds of stuff. I mean, they do everything from Broadway musical kind of stuff to sacred music. And then the parish stuff is obviously for Mass. And those are, a couple of hours a week. Then some of our children, as they graduate up into high school, will have more hours of rehearsal a week. And then they will, sing at various masses and things, and also kind of serve as support to the adult choirs that we have.
That's really great. And that intergenerational aspect is so important in helping students maintain their faith when they move out of, the sort of enclave of, where you're only in a grade with people your age to what life is like for the rest of your life as a Catholic. Okay, so let's wrap up by talking. I'm sure that people listening to you are like, wow, that sounds so awesome. I want to do that. And then they look at the reality of their situation. So, and feel a little bit more discouraged. What advice would you give to fellow priests or directors of religious ed or principals who have inherited a catechetical program or a school or a liturgical life in a parish that's really rather lackluster? Where can they start in improving it?
Well, I think that you always have to start with the children, right? First things come first. And so you start with the little ones and you just build from that. And it's amazing how when parents see that their children are involved in Mass and they know how to do things that they themselves don't know how to do. Any kind of barriers that they may have begin to fall away. But I also think it's important to be bold as well. So often, we want to avoid conflict. We want to avoid like anything that's going to cause problems. And I think we have to not be obnoxious about things, right? But when there are objections, we need to sit down with people and say, okay, so what's going on? What's the objection? What are you afraid of here? And have very human conversations. And then every time we have a new staff opening, we have to be very aggressive about recruiting the right people and building up a network of people who know how to do these kind of things. I can't tell you how many priests will call me and they will say, hey, I have an opening for this. Do you know anybody? Right. But we've got to kind of build those networks, and we can't do that if we're not kind of talking to each other, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So let me give you one final question. What resources do you know of, books to read or like websites to visit or something where people can find maybe like a sort of idea book for things that are paraliturgical, blessings, processions, all those sorts of things that you talked about to support the liturgical life of the church?
Well, I think one thing that we did as a parish staff is actually go through the Roman ritual and the Book of Blessings and look for all of the blessings that we thought that we could do publicly in the parish and the school and put them on a calendar. And say, okay, so when are we going to do this? So, for example, we wanted to do something special for pro-life things, right? And so we wanted to do something special to make the Rose Sundays kind of a different thing. So we do the blessing of expectant mothers on the Rose Sundays, on Gaudete and Laetare. And then we chose that on the first Sunday of October, which is the beginning of Respect Life Month, that we would do the blessing of mothers who have already had children. So what used to be called the churching of mothers, right? So basically, you just, bring out your parish calendar, look through the table of contents and say, hey, when are we going to do what? And then make that a living kind of thing of the parish, and then to figure out, okay, what kind of celebrations can we have that are related to this? And sometimes they sound like really stupid things. Like I'll tell the people on the Rose Sundays, I'll say, hey, next week is Laetare Sunday, so make sure you wear your rose shirts and blouses to Mass, and we have the blessing of expectant mothers, and we're going to use rose incense next week, and you build up kind of expectations. So some of it is just that, and then actually taking advantage of everything that the Missal offers. So often we just don't do a lot of stuff in the Missal, right? Candlemas is a perfect example of this. I had a priest who went to a school Mass and saw the procession, and he's like, I've never seen this before. Where did you get this? And I'm like, dude, it's in the Missal. Like, it's like right there. But he didn't even do it in the seminary. So, to a certain degree, it's not his fault. And so him coming to the school Mass and seeing this was like, oh, wow, this is really incredible. And I said, yeah, that's great.
Great. That is, this is just so wonderful, Father. I think you have probably sparked a lot of ideas and inspiration. And I'm so grateful that you were able to join me today.
Good. Well, I'm thankful for the invitation and for everything that you're doing to make sure that we have beautiful and reverent liturgies all over the place. So thank you.
Thanks, Father.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast with Dr. Jennifer Donelson-Nowicka. For more information about this episode, sacred music resources, or upcoming events, visit our website at sacredmusicpodcast.com. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. If you enjoy our podcast, please write us a review on iTunes. This improves our iTunes ranking and helps others find out about the podcast. The music you heard at the beginning of this episode is Hec Dies by William Byrd, sung by the London Oratory Schola Cantorum Boys Choir, directed by Charles Cole from the CD Sacred Treasures of England. The music at the conclusion of this podcast is from the Prelude and Fugue in G major, BWV 550 by Johann Sebastian Bach, performed by Jennifer Donelson-Nowicka. We look forward to having you join us next time, and until then, may we sing the praise of His glory.